Hi, my name is Guy Wallace, and in this video I'd like to discuss with you working at the intersection of instructional analysis and performance improvement analysis. I'm here today to speak particularly to instructional designers, instructional analysts, people who work in the ISD or ID space, instructional systems design or instructional design. Sometimes it's called training and development, learning and development, knowledge management systems, instruction, education. Our field goes by many names. In particular, I'm discussing those who are working in an enterprise learning context, building and acquiring content for others to help them improve their performance. When you're working at the intersection of instructional analysis and performance improvement, you're looking for things to go for. One of the things that you're always trying to go for is significant return on the investment. There's no sense in asking any of our stakeholders to spend $10,000 or $100,000 and not even get that back, or to simply break even. There's most likely other investments that the enterprise can make that will return far greater returns for those investments, and good business, good stewardship, those with a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders must target their investments for greater gains. Whether those gains are dollarizable or simply lead to strategic advantage, something that cannot be easily dollarized in the current situation. But business leaders must make those kinds of decisions. It's always a business decision. Sometimes we must leave training opportunities and process improvement opportunities to simple informal means if that ROI does not warrant addressing those improvement opportunities, those investment opportunities significantly. Addressing any and all training opportunities and process improvement opportunities are business decisions. If your organization embraces continuous improvement, regardless of the ROI, then I'm not speaking to you. You've already been given your directives by your enterprise leaders. However, if resources are constrained and you can't afford to address everything, you must prioritize. And you prioritize your investment opportunities based on their return on investment. Most likely dollarizable, but sometimes not. At the intersection of instructional analysis and performance improvement analysis are the business processes, the enterprise processes themselves. In my big picture of enterprise process performance improvement, EPPI, I look at three major sets of variables to impact the process. First of all, EPPI is scalable. Whether I'm looking at a team or a single process or a bundle of processes that is the responsibility of a department or a function or business units and divisions all the way up to the entire enterprise, this model is scalable. Think of budgets at the department level. They roll up with other departments to become the budget of a function, such as sales or engineering or human resources or finance itself. The same with all of the data regarding process performance. We first look at the process, and we want to understand whether the process itself has already been designed to meet all of the stakeholder requirements. If it does not meet all of the stakeholder requirements, you must start there. There's no sense buying or building new machinery or gathering new data for a faulty process. You must start at the process itself. The late Gary Rumler is quoted to say, "Put a good performer in a bad system, and the system wins every time." The same is true at the process level. Put a good performer in a bad process, and all the heroics of the performers will not save the day often enough, continuously enough, to really be the solution. What is required of the process depends on the balanced performance requirements of all of the stakeholders. Stakeholders beyond the customers. This stakeholder hierarchy is for illustrative purposes only. It shows the shareholders and owners at the top. The customers lead the definition of the products of the processes. We must serve the customers. However, if the customer requires us to violate the interests of the shareholders, to sell them products at such a low price that we lose money on each and every one of them and eventually go bankrupt, that's no good. We wouldn't do that. In the next example, we show that the government, at a higher level in the stakeholder hierarchy, all enterprises are subject to the laws of the land, the laws, the regulations, the codes imposed on them by the governments in the areas that they operate. So regardless of what the shareholders want, the government overrules each and every time. The government wins all ties in the stakeholders' requirements. In a socially responsible organization, then society itself and its needs overrides the rule of law of the governments. Yes, this is problematic. However, if we thought of the good of the world at large, the good of society, what Roger Kaufman calls mega, then we would serve the interests of all mankind on the planet and work to change the rule of law. Your stakeholder hierarchy might be somewhat different from any of these three examples. You must understand the stakeholders for your enterprise and or for the process that you're focused on, whether that's for process performance improvement efforts or instructional design efforts. You must understand all of the stakeholders and all of their requirements for both the process itself and the products produced. The customer is not king, despite the slogans and posters on the wall. Again, starting with the process, we can look at a bundle of processes at a department level, or we can look at a singular process. Theoretically, every process has some process owner. There may be cross-functional teams from other organizations working in the process, but there should be, ideally, some process owner, somebody that makes all the hard decisions when push comes to shove. Processes may be modeled or mapped in many different ways. That is often less important than understanding what the process is. Is the process lean enough? Is variation significantly reduced where variation of the process has major impact in variations on the product, etc.? That's the Lean and Six Sigma looks at this. Also, you might look at the process from the theory of constraints perspective. And do we have enough work in process at various stages so that we don't inadvertently starve the process and become less efficient? It's a tough balancing act, and there's lots of different expertise in looking at the processes themselves. But if you're an instructional designer and you're doing analysis, you must understand whether or not your instruction is going to positively impact the process itself. It may be that you cannot, simply because of the design of the process in its current state. We can also look at the environmental assets that enable the process. We can look at whether the data and information is adequate to the needs of the process, and the materials and supplies and tools and equipment and facilities and grounds, and whether we have the appropriate budget and headcount available to enable the process. And is the culture that the performers work in conducive to the needs of the process? And is the consequence system driving that culture? Or are there deficiencies in the environmental assets that enable the process? In fact, are the environmental assets, or their lack thereof, disabling the process? What is required depends on both the performance requirements of the stakeholders and the human capabilities available. Perhaps we need forklift trucks to handle heavy materials because the humans that we have are incapable of doing that on their own. So we're going to balance the capabilities of the human assets and the environmental assets. Let's look at the human asset enablers. I know many people don't like the phrase, human assets or human capital. If we get hung up in words, we'll never get anywhere. We need to use the language of our business and quit fighting it. It's just often too silly. That's not what's important. The human assets bring to the process their awareness, their knowledge, and their skills. They also bring physical attributes. They also bring psychological attributes and intellectual attributes and their personal values. These are either conducive to the needs of the process or they are not. What's important requires on both the performance requirements of the stakeholders and the environmental capabilities available. If we don't need forklift trucks often enough, then we're going to have some strong backs, physical attributes of the human performers. It's a balancing act, as I said earlier. The instructional designers or instructional systems design analysts are responsible for improving the awareness, knowledge, and skills of humans. They're not alone in this, but that's the primary focus of those of us who are in the instructional design business, the awareness, knowledge, and skills. However, you can see by this graphic that it's but one set of the variables that impact process performance and our ability to make improvements. All by itself, it is something that's got leverage, but there's so many other variables. It may not be the thing that saves the day, the thing that improves performance. We must be aware of that. How do we get these right enablers, the correct enablers to the process? Well, on the environmental asset side, there's different organizations that are involved in provisioning the right information and data to the process to enable that process. The same with materials and supplies and tools and equipment, the financial systems, the facilities and grounds, the culture, and the consequences. Various interventions might be undertaken, such as BPM, Business Process Management, or Information Technology and Data Systems Improvements, or Engineering, or Organizational Development, or Lean, or Theory of Constraints, or Six Sigma, etc., etc., etc. Those systems that help provision the right people and the jobs that people are organized in might be known as human resources or talent management systems. The things that can affect the human assets would be the onboarding systems, how we balance engagement via engaging jobs. Are the jobs designed to be engaging, or are they the same old thing, day in, day out, hour in, hour out, moment by moment? Do we have career paths and planning for careers for our employees? Do we have training for the current job? Do we have development for future jobs? Do we have qualification and certification via performance tests to help us understand who really is capable of doing certain work? We may not need that certain work done, but we might need to have the capability there. If the building were to catch on fire, do we have people that can fight the fire? And we hope we never have to use that. But should we have them on board, in place, capable? And should we pay for that? Should we pay for performance What are the reward and recognition systems that we have in place? Do they drive performance or do they inhibit performance? That's the balancing act. Provisioning the enablers to the process requires having analysis of the process requirements. Training and development, again, is just one piece of this. If we don't have the right awareness, knowledge, and skills, then we need to maybe look beyond training. Perhaps the recruiting and selection systems should have brought that in the door in the first place so that we could avoid the costs of training. There's always a balance there in how we acquire or develop the performance capabilities that we need the human assets to have. There are many provisioning systems to provide the right stuff to the processes. Training and development is just one small slice of that. Training does have some leverage at times, but not always. Communications, education, and/or training might be used in the improvement efforts for all other provisioning systems. If we redesign the organization and redesign the jobs, we're going to have to communicate that and create an awareness of that. We might have to shift some of the education to different jobs and different people. And we might have to reconfigure the training depending on how that was impacted by the redesign of the organization and the jobs. If we're going to put staffing and succession planning systems in place, we may need to communicate that. If we're going to change our recruiting and selection systems, we may need to educate people on that. If we're going to change our performance appraisal and management systems, we may need to train people on that so that managers are capable of implementing such new systems. And on and on and on. Sometimes we don't need training. Sometimes we just need to educate and create knowledge rather than skill. Sometimes we don't even need that. Sometimes we just can make people generally aware, and they will, based on their prior knowledge and skills, be able to perform to the needs of the process. Working at the intersection of instructional analysis and performance improvement analysis requires understanding the needs of the process, the performance, the requirements. I offer a book 6-pack written and developed in 2011 that address the needs of instructional designers, instructional developers, instructional analysts who are working at the intersection of instructional analysis and performance improvement analysis. In fact, the books help one segue from instruction to performance improvement consulting.